Alright guys, to start this project off we have 3 pieces of pine 2x4 cut into squares. Now the faces are pretty rough, so I'm going to go ahead and plane those completely flat, that way we have a strong glue up later on down the line. Now we're not perfect, but we're close enough. I'm going to flip it over, plane the other side, and do that to all of our pieces. Next, we're going to mark the center of each square because we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room with these hole saw bits. The inner circle, or the inner bit, is 2.5 inches, the larger bit is 3.5 inches, and that's in diameter. And we're essentially going to be cutting out a little wooden ring that's about 1/4 inch thick. Now we got our 3.5 inch drill bit chucked up, our square and a clamp. I found that that's the safest way to hold on to it, and we're going to turn that square into a circle. And we're going to repeat that same process but with the 2.5 inch drill bit. And on the 3.5 inch drill bit, just make sure you don't drill into your clamp. You're not going to have any problems here. Just make sure you aren't squeezing the wood too tight with your clamp, or else it'll be really hard to drill through it. And once you've done that with all 3 pieces of wood, you're going to find a flat surface and sand each side. And it's important to spend a lot of time doing a good job here because there's not a whole lot of surface area on these joints, so they need to be pretty flush and you need to use a good amount of glue. Now what's even more important is that the grain of each piece is facing the same direction once you glue it up. And I like to keep track of that by drawing a diamond on one of the joints and a square or a circle on the other. That way they're 1 in the right direction and 2 in the correct order. And once again, make sure you got a good amount of glue on each joint, and make sure you're using some good high quality glue. That way you just don't have to worry about your joints failing. And here's where I made the biggest mistake of this project. I only used 2 clamps, and because of that there were some gaps in our joints, but we worked with it. If you decide to make this, make sure you use at least 3 if not 4 or 5 clamps whenever you're gluing up. Now you saw we had a really rough surface, so I'm going to try to smooth that out on the lathe. I know a lot of us don't have lathes, so if you don't have one, you're going to need a lot of elbow grease, sandpaper, and files. A belt sander also really helps, but a lathe is probably the way to go. And while we're on the lathe, I'm going to go ahead and clean up that hole so that our can will fit in there real nicely. And after that we have sanding, and a lot of it. I'm going to work my way up to about 220 grit. And I really probably should have done this before I started sanding, but we need to put a bottom on there. I'm going to use some 1/2 inch pine stock that I just cut from a 2x4, cut out the circle on a bandsaw, glue it on the bottom, then run it through a belt sander and toss it back on the lathe. And make sure you take the glue up seriously because we already sunk a good 2-3 hours into this project, and it's really just not worth trying to take a shortcut. Now I didn't trust this a whole lot on the lathe, so I decided to do a majority of the work on the belt sander. Now I took a risk, threw it back on the lathe, and took off about 1/4 inch from the bottom. It worked out, so I was pretty happy with it. And then I finished up sanding with some 220 grit sandpaper. And just look at that grain, it is beautiful. And it's from 2x4s, so I was really happy, and the can fit in there like a glove. Really was extremely happy with how this project turned out. Now, I'd been having a lot of problems with polyurethane, and I was tired of it, so I just smeared on a bunch of super glue along the outside. You also want to seal the inside, because that's where most of the condensation is going to be, but it is nice to give the outside a finished look. In the end, it's completely up to you. Now, here's a quick tip that I learned. If you make the hole too big, just put some foam in there. I didn't have to do that on the one I made in the video, but it's bound to happen to someone, so I figured I'd throw that in there. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.